Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our ATAP panel discussion on addressing the challenges of school safety. I am thrilled to have a group of very experienced people in their fields from across the country. I would call them experts, but some of them would disagree. I am Anthony with ATAP Comprehensive School Safety. I'll be your host for this afternoon. And I want to introduce those wonderful people to you. I don't believe any discussion in school safety would be complete without having local law enforcement involved. And so I'm thankful to have Sheriff Troy Goodnough of Monroe County, Michigan with us. Sheriff Goodnough started out as a deputy with the sheriff's office. He spent many years on the street as a patrol deputy, working also in traffic safety and rising through leadership to the rank of major. In 2020, he was elected by the voters of Monroe County to lead law enforcement for them. So we're thankful and honored to have him spend some time with us this afternoon. Karen Dunholter has spent 25 years as a social worker in schools, providing student support through her work in Southgate schools. A member of the MASSW, Michigan Association of School Social Workers, she was selected as their MASSW Region A for Monroe, Washtenaw, and Wayne County's School Social Worker of the Year in 2022. She was then selected as the State Social Worker of the Year, and finally selected as the President of the MASSW this spring. Next, we have Mr. Guy Bliesner. Guy was a teacher and coach whom his district turned to lead them in school safety. As his superintendent moved to the state level, Guy was asked to continue and accept the additional work and promotion. He now leads the state of Idaho as their school safety and security consultant. Our next lady is Detective Ashlee Heavrin. Ashlee moved from California to Montana to acquire her bachelor's degree in biological sciences. Thereafter, she was hired on as at the Montana State University Police Department, and she works in law enforcement as one of their investigators. She's continued her education there to focus on school safety, including CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, but primarily through identifying and understanding behaviors of concern. Having designed a threat assessment and site security model used at Montana State University and most of the schools in the state, as a detective, she now leads MSUPD for student and staff behavior reporting and assessment. Finally, Mr. Andy Shaw has been a lifelong educator, working his way from teacher to principal to superintendent. He retired after 12 years as a superintendent, spending his time mentoring and assisting school districts, but was asked to return to service by his third district and now is superintendent of Monroe Public Schools. So that is our very esteemed panel that will be leading this discussion this afternoon. I want to begin, I think we can all recognize and agree that the needed funds for school safety are lacking throughout most of our country. So I'd like to have us focus our efforts and our discussion today on the programs we'd like to see in our schools and communities outside of that need for more money. That said, I would ask if you would agree that the next universal challenge for school safety is largely that we're putting that responsibility wholly on educators. Educators are untrained in the matter, most of whom got into education to teach and guide our youth and not deal with emergencies. Would anybody disagree with that as an opening statement or base for our discussion?
I think it's a great place to start.
I'm all in favor of starting in that spot.
Andy, as the educator on our panel, I think that speaks highly towards where we need to guide the discussion. Yeah. Well, Sheriff, I know from our personal conversations that you not only strive for safety across the community, but you're you're very focused on school safety, and you've taken some initiatives yourself in regards to what's going on in Monroe County. Can you share briefly an overview of what you're doing, what others might benefit?
Absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this today. It's not only affording me the opportunity to share our experiences and trials and tribulations with school safety, but to glean information from this wealth of knowledge that is the individuals that are on this panel have. And I'll start out by saying, in reference to what initiatives Monroe County Sheriff's Office has adopted or implemented to improve security in our schools, first and foremost, we must build trust with our citizens and our students, as well as the staff. If students don't feel safe in our school, their ability to learn will be significantly challenged. My long-term goal was to have an SRO, now commonly known as school resource officer, but here in Monroe County, we call them school relationship officers in each school building. And again, as I said, you may have noticed I did not use the term school resource officer. The reason being is I feel that the officer in the school needs to build relationships with not only the staff, but the student body as well as their parents. This will enhance the level of trust, which in turn improves the learning atmosphere for our students. We want the students to feel comfortable speaking with law enforcement, sharing information, and collaboration. This will enhance the level of trust, which in turn improves their learning atmosphere. I feel if the students are able to bond with law enforcement, if they find themselves in a situation where their actions may result in being thrust into the legal system, they may reflect on their relationship and trust in their school relationship officer and not perform the illegal activity or condoned activity for that matter. In partnership with the ISD and the various public school districts in Monroe County, we place portable police radios in each school district, high school buildings, and in some districts, a radio in each building. The purpose of this initiative is that in the event of an active shooter or a very serious situation, the office staff can communicate directly with Monroe County Central Dispatch to request law enforcement assistance rather than picking up the phone and calling. In the event of a call of this nature is made, all on-duty law enforcement staff in the county will hear the call for help over the radio and respond immediately rather than waiting for our central dispatch personnel to field the information, enter it in the CAD system, and then make a radio announcement that assistance is needed. Again, not a lot of time to do this function, but it reduces our response time. And as we know in emergencies involving in all emergencies, that seconds count. In partnership with Airport, Jefferson, Ida, and Mason school districts, we added 4 additional SROs at the start of the school year. And we also partnered with the Monroe County Intermediate School District, who 100% funded a school resource or relationship sergeant to oversee the 9 SROs. And part of that, his duties, that SRO supervisor, is to coordinate ALICE training for all school employees and students on an annual basis, develop boilerplate information and single emergency response plans, which can be altered to accommodate each school building rather than multiple 100+ page plans. And again, to show consistency across our many school districts. You heard me mention the radios in each school district. That supervisor will also hold annual training on utilization and functioning of those radios, develop an after-action debriefing plan if we have the unfortunate circumstance of a situation that requires such plan. But the most important thing that I think is a part of our initiative here in Monroe County is to conduct annual active shooter training with all first responders, staff, and students, so that each entity knows their respective roles in an active shooter situation. We know when we see an active shooter, there's always a debriefing. We've seen a lot of plans that have gone error-free and have positive outcomes for the best of the students and the citizens. And we feel that our developing a single plan for every school district in Monroe County will improve or enhance our school safety from an holistic standpoint.
Wow, Sheriff, there's so much there. I applaud what you're doing. I know, so you said Monroe ISD has funded the school relationship. I don't even want to use the SRO term to be misunderstood. That Monroe ISD has funded their school relationship sergeant, right?
Yes, they funded it 100%. So that officer will be in the ISD school building. He will do, or part of his duties include the functions of that as an SRO, but also as an SRO supervisor. And, you know, the big thing with this is collaboration and coordination with our many school district superintendents. I mean, he's hit the ground running, and I couldn't be more pleased.
That's fantastic. And the actions you have been taking, the radio training, working on the after action plan, which I know Guy here has done a lot of work in that. I'll make sure to connect you with some of his work, but that's got to be huge for the district. Now, I know because I'll get asked, the radios that you're providing, they're on police band. Are those then provided and maintained by the sheriff's office?
So, and I'm glad you asked that question, Anthony. The radios they were purchased 100% by the ISD. We worked in collaboration with Central Dispatch to agree on the radio channel, if you would. And they're responsible for any maintenance fees or physical maintenance issues. But again, the role of this SRO sergeant is to make sure the radios are functioning properly, proper training, and coordinate any repairs or any maintenance that needs to be done. So we will probably do monthly radio checks to make sure everything's operating. This was a pretty heavy lift for the ISD, and I applaud them for spending that money on those radios. I see the benefit in it. Seconds count. And when they pick up that radio and announce that we have this emergency, all hands on deck, they're responding.
Right. Yeah, that's going to speed up some response time there. So we'll come back, and as we generate this panel discussion, there's going to be some back and forth here. But Mr. Shaw, as a superintendent in Monroe County, you've got to appreciate the efforts that the sheriff's department is taking. And you're leading your third district. You also mentor other superintendents as they lead theirs. How are you looking to help? Because I know you just took office here. How are you looking to help Monroe Public Schools as you deal with the ongoing challenges of time, money, and expertise?
Oh, that's a great question. First, I want to piggyback on what the sheriff was just talking about. The collaboration is key. He and I spoke on this, working together and having that training available. So that helped. That radio, for example, it begins to be very proactive. We're not reacting to something. We're trying to be forward thinking. And so I appreciated that point right there. And the other part is the relationships. I'm going to spend a little bit of a moment there. Fortunately, in my school district, we get both the city at our high school the county is at our high school with a resource officer, and then our middle school has a city employee. And so we actually have both entities here in our district, and they couldn't have worked any better together. I see these two gentlemen together in a lot of different settings, and they're like buddies, and they understand that, and they're here to do the work of building relationships with our students. And that's probably when I left Erie Mason 2 years ago. We had a school resource officer, and that was one of the goals I had, is that person had to have a relationship with kids and understanding of that. When it comes to what we're doing here at Monroe Public, it is really just peeling back and looking closely at what do we already have in place, and then what is needed out there. And so that's been our work here. We're actually putting together a comprehensive school team to dive into this at the district level. Each building already has a school crisis team there, but at the district level, we don't have one. And it's that safety committee work in this district that we have to do, and really bringing all of it together, because what I found was that there's not one lead person in our district. We have our gentleman from the police forces, but who's taking the lead in each different building, or who is the direct lead in our district? And so we're actually working on addressing that part right there. school safety, other part that we've been fortunate is we passed a bond a few years ago. So from a hardening side, we're already doing the appropriate steps for making so when people are coming into our buildings, the corridor is set up so they can't get through. What's even more impressive is just the level of security that we have in those settings right there. So it's not going to stop everything. We do know that, but we're already a step ahead. Where we need the greatest help in our school, and I think it's probably the same around a lot of different ones, is it's just looking at what our kids are doing and what is happening out there and what are their needs and staying in tune to that. Sheriff Goodnough said it best. What are we doing to try and stop students from getting into the jail or prison system? And so it's that relationship side of it, but recognizing what's going on in kids' lives now. And that's where, a lot of our resources need to go is to get to the kids first before they even begin to make a mistake out there, and having those supports. But, I thoroughly appreciate the relationship we have with our sheriff right there. More work to do in our district, but, we watch our resources and distribute them appropriately here.
Andy, what about the issues with expertise and liability?
Yeah. So those two items right there, the expertise, and that's part of why we're putting that school safety committee together, is who is the expert in the room right there? Who's going to make sure that we're following drills, what's coming up? And that could be through the sheriff's office. It could be from others. But at the same time, we have to also take on the responsibility of doing this work. But the liability side for us is we always try to mitigate all liability. And so if that means having consultants working with us, we have that already happening in the area of our student achievement. And you bring in a consultant because you see what's going on and going, hey, we need to make an address somewhere here. On the school safety side, again, liability right there is we want to make sure our people are trained, know what to do, and so that it will lessen the amount of liability. And then effectively communicate that to parents and then really work to keep that communication out in front of them as best we can. But I think everything stops and starts still for us. It's with our ISD, it's with our locals, and it's with our sheriff's department. If we all have a strong connection where we can stand next to each other, it makes a big difference.
I think that's a huge difference, and I know you're going to hear a couple other panelists echo that sentiment. The difference between, the society we came from, where we each have our own little area that we work in, to now bringing all that together. So I'm going to turn that to Ms. Dunholter with the obvious challenges facing kids, and anybody who was a parent, had a kid in school during this time of COVID, the extra resource challenges. What do you see as important to improving the focus beyond the physical security needs of schools?
So I just want to piggyback on what everyone else is saying too. Anthony, thank you for allowing this discussion to happen. It's very important information. And like everyone is saying, we cannot continue to just work within our district. The needs of our students are much greater than they have been, especially post-COVID. So working together as a community and other communities coming together to help each other. I was at a training today and I really liked this quote. It said, "Your safe school is our safe school." So kind of like the old, it takes a village. It is not just the school's responsibility to keep the kids safe. However, as a school social worker, I try and focus on the mental health needs of our students. And of course, post-COVID, the needs have definitely risen. So my focus was, what can I do to get these kids identified that really need help and get them the help that they need? So something that we were able to implement in our district was a K through 12 mental health screener. So we screened every student in the district to see if there was any mental health concerns, suicidal ideation, if they needed resources like food or clothing, or if there was any abuse or neglect going on in their home. And it was really interesting to have that information, because a lot of times you might not know what's going on in a kid's life. And if they're not acting out in school, you wouldn't be digging further. So it brought to the forefront a bunch of kids that were struggling, and we were able to then contact parents and then help educate parents on this is what mental health concerns look like, because I work at the secondary level with teenagers. So a lot of times parents would say, oh, I just thought that was teenage moodiness. No, these are actual signs of depression. And then linking them to an outside agency to get them help. Another thing we were able to do was social emotional lessons, K through 12 again. And these are lessons kind of like as a preventative. Like I think Sheriff Goodnough was saying, what are the preventatives for these kids to put in place so they don't end up in the jail system? So we're doing a lot of social emotional education around different topics like relationships, anger management, and educating kids. These are what mental health symptoms are. So if they're experiencing it themselves or their friends, they can more easily identify it. And then what are coping skills? So that was an important thing that we were able to implement again due to COVID and coming back, and the focus being more on mental health than academics. Because of course, in the past, the focus in the schools is academics, but this was able to shift and help the kids get the support that they needed for struggling with their own mental health. And again, educating parents, we were able to educate staff. And that's important too, because I am a mental health person, so I easily recognize symptoms or signs of, possible violent behavior or mental health concerns, but our teachers don't know that. They might pick up on some things, but giving them the signs, the warning signs, so then they can refer a student to get help, or giving, again, parents the information so they can get their kids help sooner rather than later. And then again, the big thing that everyone is saying is the partnerships. So I really focused a lot these past couple of years on partnerships within our community to wrap around our students. Because again, it can't just be the school. I'm one social worker in a building with 1,000 kids. So how can I build a bigger support system to help them to manage their life as a teenager, but then also if they're dealing with mental health concerns? So I was able to get therapy dogs. It's an agency that does it for free, because again, you were talking about cost and no cost solutions. So we're able to get therapy dogs for every school in the district. I was able to partner with our local community mental health agency, and you think we would have done this years ago, but again, this all kind of came to the forefront because of COVID, and now we have a really good partnership. So if my students are needing services and they have a hard time going through all the red tape of the system, I have a contact where I can expedite services and get them the help that they need. And then also the other thing is, again, working with other districts, seeing what other districts are doing. So COVID, once again, was able to open up the door of this video conferencing. So now I was able to meet with high school social workers across Wayne, Washtenaw, Monroe County. And together we talked about what were resources, ideas, and trainings to help us better help our students. And then on top of that, something that I'm hoping to start soon is a downriver school safety task force. And again, partnering with our law enforcement, our community mental health, our ER, because a lot of times we send our students for evaluations to the ER, and the school superintendents, the school social workers. I've gotten a really good response so far. So again, coordinating how we're helping these students, how law enforcement in the area we're in, they have what's called mutual aid. So a law enforcement department from another city or the surrounding cities would be responding to a situation at our school. So hopefully simplifying, and I think I heard Andy say the same thing, the plans, or Sheriff Goodnough, the plans amongst all the schools, because they're going to be responding to several school districts, not their own town. So if we have similar protocols, procedures, language, they'll be better able to help our students and staff to stay safe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're going to hear a lot of that echoed by Detective Heavrin. I want to follow up real quick. You talked about staff recognition for warning signs, and I know Detective Heavrin's going to, that's what she does, and she's got a program based on that. As you talk with your other school social workers, they're echoing the same comment, I'm sure.
Yes. And I just realized, we talk amongst each other, and we're realizing, because we're trained that way, we just automatically think that way. And we're realizing that, again, our teachers are not trained in mental health. And there's situations that happen during the school day that sometimes we don't find out about until later because they didn't recognize it as a concern, whereas we did. So we, again, are needing to educate our staff, but also our parents. Because a lot of our parents, like I said, when we did the mental health screener and we called, they were shocked, or they were like, well, I just thought, again, teenage moodiness. The difference between teenage moodiness and an actual mental illness is a distinction that needs to be made to better identify the kids sooner and get them the help sooner.
Yeah, I saw just this morning, there's a new study that was released talking about the depression in youth and the need for those kind of assessments. I know from conversations with Sheriff Goodnough that he's a huge advocate for mental health work across, of course, he's focused on Monroe County, but he's talking about mental health assistance across our communities to prevent these issues from becoming greater. So that's going to be a part of our discussion as we circle back here. I want to make sure we get our other two panelists in here. Mr. Bliesner, the same question. What do you see, and I know this is going to be great because you and I have had several conversations on a large part of this, but what do you see as important to focus on? Because you and I come from wholly different backgrounds, myself as law enforcement and yourself as an educator, but both focused on school safety.
There are a couple of things. Our office was founded 7 years ago now with the idea that comes out of education, and that's assess before you treat. Have some idea of what it is you're going to do before you do it and why you need to do that. So the office was founded with an assessment protocol as the basis of what our office provides Idaho schools. And that assessment is holistic because as an educator, I understand something that not everybody does. Karen will absolutely resonate with this, but it's the climate and culture we create in a school that keeps us safe first. All of the rest of the stuff is just a tool. And it depends on whether that climate and culture is effectively designed and developed to utilize the tool. So that's kind of where we're at. And that doesn't matter if it is a shot detection or radio or cameras or any of those things, or behavioral threat assessment or, all of those are tools. We have to understand and utilize those tools effectively. I'm a believer, and we've all been touched by Uvalde, but Uvalde was first and foremost, before any other failure, it was a climate and culture failure. They had a process that said those doors would be locked at all times. They weren't. That's a cultural failure first. There were several others along the way, but as an educator, that resonates for me because you have to accept. I've always heard that it has to be driven from the top. It has to be accepted at the top. It has to be driven from the bottom. I mean, you have a superintendent who is highly supportive of the process. If he goes in and says you will do this, and that to a school, and it becomes intrusive of the educational process, teachers will figure out ways around whatever it is they want done. So you build that safety committee at the school level, and you get their input, because security and convenience are always polar opposites. They have to be. We have to figure out where that proper balancing point is, and that depends on the threats you face and the vulnerabilities you have to them. So that's that assessment piece. In our office, we do a full threat and vulnerability assessment on not only the physical security elements, but the student supportive service elements, on the elements of operations and how they are interrelated with the operations of the law enforcement and first responders who serve them. So we're looking at this very holistically. You're 3.5 times more likely to be struck by lightning than to be the victim in a school shooting in the United States. The reality. There are 8 times as many fires in schools as there are school shootings. There are 20 to 30 times more non-custodial abductions. Your security profile has to address all of the threats and not expose your threat or raise your vulnerability to one to lower your vulnerability to another. So it's very, very important that you look at this holistically and understand, at the end of the day, it's people that keep students safe. It's not all the stuff.
Yeah, as we look at 2 horrendous school shootings, one from inside the school, one from outside the school within the last year, so much of that rings true. Oxford, one of the most technically secure schools in our state of Michigan, my home state here, and we missed the student piece. So I love, throughout our conversations, I love that holistic approach. Mr. Shaw and the educators I've talked to talk about educating the whole child, and you're changing that nomenclature a little bit to talk about improving the whole school safety, not just working on one piece. So as just a little bit more, as you made that transition from educator and coach into school safety, what drove that focus on the culture piece of our school safety?
Well, I taught math, history, and swimming and coached at the high school level. And like many of us, I made that decision to move. We call it moving to the dark side. I got my administrative credential because I couldn't afford, when your family qualifies for free and reduced lunch in the school you teach in, it's a little rough to try and raise kids. So I did that. I was in a building for a very short period of time when the Bailey, Colorado shooting took place. And what happened is what in effect here in Idaho, we call security theater. They said, whoa, we need someone who is a school security guru whose job is to do all of this. Bliesner, you didn't run fast. So I moved into the process, began to develop my background, went from the master's degree to an associate's in emergency management, and did just all kinds of stuff to try and bring myself up to speed, and began to interact with folks in the industry. But again, and this is not an indictment of my brothers and sisters in blue in any fashion, because on the worst possible day in a school, I'm not the guy showing up. Ain't me. But policemen, by their nature and by their approach and training, tend to be tactical and offensive. And so they see the world sometimes through that lens. And you and I have discussed this. Teachers, by their nature and necessity, are strategic and defensive, because you aren't attacking anybody with 23 second graders. It just doesn't happen. So we have to we have to work together for us, it's to teach our first responding brothers and sisters the context of a school. For them, it's to teach us the realities of security. And I've spent the last 18 years doing that. So that's kind of that's how I ended up there. And the transition for me was I had taken the job, and about 6 weeks into the year, the Bailey, Colorado shooting happened. 2 weeks later than that, Nickel Mines happened. Unfortunately, I had a 16-year-old daughter and I had a 7-year-old granddaughter. And both of them, that resonated. It hurt me. At that moment, this became a crusade for me. I was going to learn all I could, understand how this all has to work together to create a whole. I mean, basically, we're creating I call it the Ferrari of school security. All the parts have to work together, or you're driving a Yugo. It's just that simple. And so it's understanding the challenges and approaches that our first responders have to help them understand the challenges and approaches that we have, and understand that left of bang, if we can get ahead of these things, I would rather intervene all day long than respond. And that's the reality is, and Karen knows this, but 83% of school shooters are our own kids. And a good portion of those are suicides. They're just suicides grandly. Teachers are absolutely the best positioned people to see deviance in baseline behavior. As soon as they see that, they need to report it. There needs to be a clean reporting process, but that's a climate and culture deal. Because teachers, when they report that to someone, they think it means that they're not a good teacher because they needed help in the classroom. And that's a dynamic we have to change. And Ashlee will talk about it here in just a minute on threat assessment, but where threat assessment fails is not in the assessment process. It's in the intake process. It's how early did we get in and how much time did we have to make the deviance off that baseline direction that kid's going. So that's, again, I may sound passionate, and I am, and you and I spent a day together at a high school in Idaho with me screaming at you. So I'm going to turn it back over. We're going to let Ashlee talk, because I'm firmly convinced that effective behavioral threat assessment is the tool. But how do we activate that in a climate and culture standpoint?
Yeah, and early enough to really get the kids the resources they need to make the difference in their lives. So some huge challenges there. Detective
Anthony, I'm going to say something else before. You may all not be aware of this. Anthony will be a published author as of the 19th of October. He has an article that will be published in Campus Safety Magazine. So congratulations.
Thank you. As somebody who's written multiple times, and I omitted that from your introduction, you should have said something early on, but as somebody who is a repeated journalist in that sense, that means a lot. So Detective Heavrin, coming in last, but certainly not least, having heard from all these panelists and in some regards being told what you're going to talk about, I'll leave the question to you and let you answer as you would. You see both sides. Being a police officer who works in the area of threat assessment, you see the physical needs, the non-physical needs. Share with us your thoughts on how schools can address the gap in school safety.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thanks for inviting me into this panel. It's a really good opportunity, and I just appreciate everybody who's here. So thanks for also giving me the tools and all of the intel ahead of time. No, I'm very passionate about what I do, as I think we all are. But yeah, I deal a lot with the physical security side of things. I deal a lot with the non-physical side of things. And I think I want to start a little bit broader, right? So, after Columbine, law enforcement, first responders changed how they were responding to active shooter. And that has worked for a long time, right? And then Virginia Tech happened. And one of the biggest things that we got out of Virginia Tech was behavior intervention teams. And I think what everybody has talked about in this conversation so far is trying to avoid working in silos, right? If we work in silos, we're not actually doing each other any good. We might be making the right decision, we might be making the wrong decision, but overall, if we're not making any decision as a cohesive team, we're not really being as effective as we possibly could be. And we're certainly not working efficiently in that way. And so when we start bringing people together, we're bringing pieces to the team, to the puzzle together, and we're collaborating together and really solving that puzzle, we're learning all of the concerning things about people of concern, whether that be a student, whether that be a staff member, whether that be a visitor, whoever it is, whatever the threat, if you will, or what we like to call the subject may be, we want to make sure that we're getting all of the right players at the table to make sure that we're addressing all of the things that are concerning to us. And hopefully we're being preventative, right? I'm not in the business of predicting things. I'm in the business of preventing things. And so the quicker we can identify issues or people or behaviors of concern, the quicker that we can start to inquire as to what's going on, assess the situation adequately, efficiently, and appropriately, and then manage what we're looking at. And hopefully we're preventing the active shooter event, or what we call the attack. And so, you know, when we get a case, we want to make sure that people actually understand what the team is capable of, what we're here to serve for. And a lot of that has to do with what you all have already talked about, which is educating. We need to make sure that we're educating our schools, students, staff, parents, because those are all resources in these situations. And we want to make sure that everybody is aware of, you know, when we say something, then what do? It's do something, right? How do I report it? Where do I report it? What do I report? How do I identify what's concerning, right? And so those can all be relative depending on who you're asking and who you're talking to. So we want to make sure that we're educating our communities on what those important pieces are that we need to know to assess. And then some tools that we can implement in that are referral systems, whether that's an app or an email process or whatever that looks like. You know, we want to make sure that we provide that tool for people to use, and then have that team ready to go so that we can adequately assess the behavior. And then the idea being that we're actually addressing those concerns before anything bad happens and before they're escalating on the pathway to violence. Keep it really low and keep it de-escalated, or if it's already coming to us high, which a lot of times it does, especially when you don't have a community that is educated in this field. A lot of our cases come into us at already a really elevated level. And so we have to make sure that our team is adequately educated in how to de-escalate it and bring it back down to a manageable level to keep it at baseline. And then how do we manage keeping that person there so that they can be successful, right? Our whole goal is to keep people in a sense of normalcy and a safe place and help everybody involved get to success, right? We want our students to thrive. We want our employees to thrive, and we want to keep our communities safe. And so if we have a well-rounded management team to do that, we can absolutely prevent a lot of things. Everybody has pieces of the puzzle. It's just, are we communicating that? And are we actually addressing it safely? And then when we're backing that with the structural concerns, right, the physical security measures, I mean, we're only ramping up the system even more and making sure that we have a wholehearted, well-rounded, comprehensive approach to school safety.
Again, short discussion, so much there. As a layperson, here's how I interpreted some of your language there. The later behaviors are reported, the more likely they are to be escalated.
High risk.
So it goes back to the earlier we can diagnose some of these things, the earlier we can share information and address resources, the more likely we are to prevent any kind of major incident. I know from our ATAP researcher, Jackie Noto, soon to be recognized with those doctor initials, that the same behavior patterns of concern are indicative of kids who commit suicide, they run away, they become addicted to something, or, as the initiative for our discussion here, become attackers in the school. So I love what you're talking about there with well-rounded reporting and management of those incidents, some multidisciplinary teams.
Yeah, and you know, we want to keep people in a good state. I like to refer to it as mental wellness. We want to keep people in that mental wellness positive state so that we can prevent things and again, just really make sure people are successful and thriving. And that means that could mean different things for different people. I mean, every case is different. And, you know, we just have to make sure that we're taking into consideration not just the person of concern, but also all the people that are impacted by that person, which could be other students, it could be staff members. You know, our teachers are on the ground and you know, they're sort of the front lines, they're seeing everything. We just need to make sure that they know how to recognize things that are concerning and what to do about it.
So I'm going to ask the sheriff to address a little part of that because I know he's a big advocate for mental health and resources. Guy used the term that I'm sure hit home with him, getting left of bang, in stopping an incident before it becomes violent. Sheriff, thoughts on the mental health piece and where, other than advocating with our legislatures to provide funding, how do we help schools get into that area of mental health?
Well, and thank you for allowing me to respond to that, Anthony. And I was remiss in mentioning that in my initial responses. I think it's critical. Everybody on this panel will tell you early identification is critical to reducing or mitigating our exposure to violence. And to answer your question, in Michigan, most, if not all, community mental health authorities will provide mental health first aid training for free. And if not, I know some do it at a very minimal cost. It's 8 hours of training that, and I don't mean to deviate too much from the forum here, but I can tell you when I was major of jail operations, I trained my entire correction staff on mental health first aid. And you talk about mitigating our exposure to liability. Within 2 weeks of that training, we had an individual that was going through a mental health episode or that was arrested and lodged for what was thought to be drunk driving. And through the mental health training, the officer identified that individual probably had a low blood sugar. He was close to going into a coma, shipped him by ambulance to the hospital, and the medical staff said, you probably saved his life. And when I asked the officer, what made you not just handle this as a standard drunk driver, book him, put him in the holding cell, he said the mental health first aid was key. So again, early detection, intervention, building them relationships with not only the school staff, but the citizens. And, you know, and like I said, I apologize for not mentioning that. That was at the forefront of my conversation. It's just when you get knee deep into this, without good and copious notes, that's what happens.
There is so much. There is so much to this school safety piece. It's easy to miss that one aspect. But I know from our conversations that that's a huge outreach of yours. So I wanted to circle back to that. Now, I'm going to open, we're technically in our last 10 minutes here before we go to Q&A. So I'll see who wants to respond to this. I'll bring us back to Oxford because, again, we had a technically secure building with a traumatic attack. It's nothing less than terrorism. But also resulting from that is an increase of liabilities on the administrators in school districts. So what either side of that, what lessons can we take from these ongoing incidents? You know, we're seeing more lawsuits come out of Parkland. That situation is just finally reaching a criminal culmination. But what lessons can we take and how do we better protect our kids?
If I may, I'll start it. We're absolutely responsible for this. And that means that, as you see, and I'm a fan of the process of, if your teachers are best positioned to know their kids, in 2 weeks, they'll know baseline behavior on every kid in their class. If they see deviance from that baseline behavior, we have to encourage that movement. Now, it may be that in first hour he was a little off because he didn't get breakfast and mom growled at him. But if you get one referral to someone like Karen on a kid, he's on the radar. If you get 6 referrals in 2 days, he's a red flag. You're going to get to that kid. That means we have to make it culturally not only accepted, but the expected ethos in a building that we report those things and we report them as we see them, that we don't default to the normalcy bias. He's just a little off today.
Can Can I dovetail off that?
Hang on one second. I'll go to you next, Ashlee, but Guy, you said we are responsible. Who's your we as you think about that?
Well, remember that as the educator in this group, or as one of the educators in this group, there's a legal responsibility for us that doesn't exist for other people. It's in loco parentis, in the place of the parent. When they put them in our hands in the morning, we stand in that place until we return them to their hands in the afternoon. That's the we I talk about. And by that, I don't mean just teachers. I mean anyone involved in the educational system. We're all educators and we're all bound by in loco parentis. That's the lunch lady and the duty aide and the custodian and you name it. We should be watching these kids. And quite frankly, I say we because inside that school building, that's the we got.
That's where I was going with that. And whether it's with a SRO or a consultant like myself, that we then goes to we, everybody involved in that education system. So go ahead, Ashlee. I know you want to respond.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, and the we also involves, it's again, just those partnerships. And it's not just with your SROs, it's with your parents. As somebody that has a child, I also like to talk to my daughter's teacher. What's going on? How are things today? Best part of the day, worst part of the day, and really just having that communication, that open door, and that rapport. And that really reflects back to the trust that was mentioned earlier, trusting your team, trust, and like being very transparent with these processes too, right? So we're being transparent with the school and the teachers and sort of like what our team is doing. And then we're also being really transparent with the parents, like this is what we do and this is how we want to support you and your family. And then working through our SROs, I know that here locally where I live, whenever law enforcement deals with a family where they respond to the home or whatever the case may be, and there are children present, we communicate all of our officers. We communicate with our SROs so that the SROs can give extra care to those students while they're at school the next day. And so we use a care program. It's, I think, similar to some of the ones that you guys have locally there. But yeah, we just want to give some extra wraparound care to those students because we know that what they're going through is more than probably what they know how to process. And so we want to make sure that we support that.
Can I piggyback off of that? What Ashlee is saying, as a school social worker, that's something I've tried to implement in our local law enforcement. And hopefully with this task force, we can, implement this in all the areas. Because as a school social worker, I might not know that a student has had a traumatic incident at their home. They might come to school and just go through the school day and act like nothing's wrong. And sometimes I have found out, of course, through the grapevine or a friend of theirs, like, hey, the police came to their house last night and busted down the door and their dad was arrested. And, I would want to check in with that student and just see if they're okay. So I think that is, again, a huge piece, is making that connection with law enforcement and working together with the schools. But I also wanted to go back to the point of liability. We had a actual threat assessment training today in our school district. I said, what a coincidence. And he brought up a really great point. There's people that are like, oh, I'm not a mental health person, so I shouldn't be trained in this. He's like, but if you aren't trained, that's a bigger liability for you. And that you, like you said, Ashlee, it's a multidisciplinary team. It's not just one person by themselves. It is a team of people. And again, getting the training, getting the awareness, the education is going to help you in a situation more than saying, oh, I'm not a mental health person, I don't want to know this information. That's creating a bigger liability.
Sure. Yeah. I've had people step up and say, well, what if I make the wrong decision? I don't want to be involved. Right. And it's like, well, it comes back to that, making the right decision, making the wrong decision, but making no decision or not being involved in the first place. You're already making a decision, right, by not being involved. So you're already making that choice. But we could make a better choice, but potentially. So I just try to encourage people, the more you know, the better off you'll be, and the more education you get, let's work together.
I'm just going to quickly hop in with just one item real fast because I can't outdo any of these guys and they're all right on the money, but it's also empowering our kids and parents was a takeaway. We went through a situation a few weeks ago where Snapchat, love Snapchat, you know how that all goes. And there was a threat made on Snapchat. Students took a screenshot of it and showed it to their parents. Parents then made a phone call to the student who had made the threat. Two things happened there. We're not sure which. If the parents either felt like the student, these other parents didn't take it seriously, or they did take it seriously, but no matter what, they still turned it over to local law enforcement. Local law enforcement got involved immediately. So we made sure to, through different means, make sure the parents and the students were said, hey, great, this is exactly how we want this to go. We're all in this together. Another situation happened a few days later where it was very similar, where the students stepped up and communicated quickly so we could handle something. And so having, empowering our kids and parents to act in this is also vital.
That's creating that climate and culture that we talked about, that, you know, a culture of being an upstander, not a bystander, a culture that says we will do the things that we need to do. I'm going to report deviance from baseline behavior. I'm going to report my friend who says odd things, all of those things. And quite frankly, I'm going to close the door behind me and kick the rock out. So, but that climate and culture piece is so critical to this.
Yeah, that little bit makes a huge difference. And Sheriff, I don't know if you're still with us or if you had to go. That Joy being in. All right, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to that, sir. Go ahead.
The question in respect to liability, is that what?
Yeah, we're wrapping up. Any final thoughts here before?
No, again, I think everybody's on the same page. You know, we have to, it's called building relationships. It's called, we're not in a silo. You know, I think Ashlee hit it on the head. We have to work collaboratively together for the betterment of the students, the staff, and their families. And, you know, it was funny, Karen noted the Handle with Care program. About 7 hours ago, my SRO sergeant rolled out an email reminding my entire staff the Handle with Care program. And ironically, we had an unfortunate drowning in our community that was witnessed by a 13-year-old student. And before that email went out, the SRO at that school was aware of it, notified another building where this student attended, and we had resources in place that if this student arrived at school today, we were prepared to handle it. But more importantly, we're prepared for the coming weeks to deal with the tragedy that this young 13-year-old witnessed. So I couldn't, like I said, it's a wealth of knowledge. I wish we could bottle this all up in one big document and say this is the boilerplate information that all school districts need. And again, this was great dialogue. I hope that people take advantage of, I understand this was recorded. Tap into this, look at it. And you know, I don't have all the answers, but I think in the group of men and women that were here, I'm pretty confident that we checked all the boxes that if you want to be a school district that stands above and beyond, proactive, not reactionary, take what these panelists said. You can forget what I said. They're all the experts. I just checked the box, and I think you'll find that your school system is far superior than those that don't take advantage of this information.
Very well said, sir. I want to echo that comment. I want to thank each of you for participating. I have 2.5 pages of notes here for myself. Again, it's not about what we know, it's what we can learn from each other. I am going to throw in a little plug here from our company. Understand that none of these panelists have sponsored any of our programs. None of them are here participating to advocate for our programs. However, I think if you check out our ATAP Comprehensive website, you'll find that the work we do echoes the sentiments of the experts that were here. I am going to come back with a couple of questions in a minute, but a couple of the things that ATAP does to address these concerns is we have a comprehensive safety approach. we don't look at any one aspect of school security or safety being more important than the others. It's how all the pieces work together, which is why we have a staff comprised not only of former safety folks like myself, but educators, researchers, counselors, and threat assessors. And as our staff continues to grow, none of us has the whole answer, but together we can come up with a great answer. As these panelists have talked about the need to identify early and to share information, we have a program that we're looking for pilot schools on, and Ms. Dunholter, you're going to hear from us on that program called ATAP Assist. That is simply an information sharing program. It tracks and shares student behaviors. From the positive, we need to know when Johnny's having a great soccer game or when Sally's picking up trash in the hallway, but we also need to know when Jimmy's parents are getting divorced or Susie witnesses a tragic death. Those incidents are all going to create ripples through our life, and the more that our educators can understand, share the information, and provide resources, we think the quicker and the better resolution that can come from that. So yes, and one of the comments, Sheriff, kudos to your sergeant for putting out that information. I think you'll hear echoes from the Handle with Care program and our ATAP Assist, but kudos to your sergeant for sharing that information, and really kudos to your SRO for being on point and leading that care for that student. Direction or not, that's huge for him. A couple of questions. One from a panelist who had to leave early, Sheriff. How do local regional police or even school resource officer reach out to young people to build trust, given the present day suspicion and mistrust with law enforcement, something that I know has been huge across our country?
Being in that school, interacting with them, and not from, I always tell everybody that law enforcement officer cannot wear the hat of law enforcement and the hat of school administrator. So often we see schools saying, I'm going to take this individual as a law enforcement officer and use him as a disciplinarian. I make it very clear that we do not want that. They can be an aid to the disciplinary model, but they need to build friendship. They walk down that hall, I want them high-fiving them students. I want them to ask them students, hey, Stephen, how you doing today? I want that interaction. I was never an SRO because I couldn't fill that. I was too black and white in my early days. Now that I've expanded my educational horizon, maybe something would be different. But I want them, and as I said in my opening comments, trust. And I want that little angel on their shoulder that when they think about doing something wrong, saying, would deputy or SRO so-and-so want me to do this? And we want to build them relationships. And that's what it's all about, and trust. So that's my recipe for this. And you know what? I tell everybody in Monroe County, I'd be hard pressed to say that 1% of our 154,000 population don't respect or approve of law enforcement in general. Michigan State Police, the city police, sheriff's office, and local municipality. We start building that trust when that student goes home and says, Deputy so-and-so gave me $1 today because I didn't have my lunch money. Deputy so-and-so talked to me about football, baseball. Then the parents are going to change and go, boy, he's just not there as the guy that's going to hold me accountable for my poor decisions. So it starts with that building. It's like kindergarten, right? We can set the tone for that child early on.
I'm going to make a quick comment in regards to that. We did not have an SRO in our district. We do now. She's amazing. But before that, I kind of did something similar, Sheriff Goodnough, where I had the canine officer, and I used him a lot with our special needs classroom. I had him interacting with our special needs kids, so then he could also understand disabilities. And again, they could look at him as a trusted individual. But also, I had students that had some extreme emotional needs. So I used him to come in before they would have an emotional breakdown and kind of build a relationship using the dog. So when he did have to respond to the school, when the kid was out of control, he's already known him in a different way. So kudos to your department again. It sounds like you guys are ahead of the game and doing all the social emotional stuff that's needed in the schools.
There's one more I'm going to talk about that a local agency does. They have a program they call Blue in the School. A patrol officer who has responsibility for the area the school's in, once a week, they have somebody, one of the local restaurants will give them the pizza. They go and have lunch with a classroom of kids in their classroom. Just bring the pizza in, sit down with a specific group of 25, 30 kids and have that free-ranging discussion and leave. And they do that until they've gotten every classroom in the school through the year. It's a wonderful program.
Very good. Very good. Sheriff, is there any different training that you send your school? And I'm not going to use the SRO term, the school relationship officers to, or is that simply what you're doing in the police department?
Well, I would like to say it's what we're doing here. There's a plethora of training out there from teen to DARE. You know, I'm a big proponent of DARE. Monroe Public School District, the ISD helps us support DARE here in Monroe County. You know, I want to expand DARE into the middle school. There's a program that's made available for that. You know, this isn't rocket science. You just do the right thing at the right time for the right reason, and you'll have positive outcomes.
I'm going to piggyback on that right there with the sheriff. I think it's also vital that you have your school relationship officer is a part of what we do. And when I'm talking about part of that, part of our school improvement times, part of our staff meetings, part of just what goes on there. And so that way they're just a fiber of what we do. And that's what happens in our school district. They're just a fiber of us. And so they get it right there, and they know when they need to take a tough stance. We work together and we have a conversation. I do want to say thank you to everybody for this tonight, but I do need to step off. I've got a school board meeting that starts shortly. And so I need to go and prepare myself a little more. So take care and thank you for this time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Shaw. Question for you, Guy. You mentioned methods to intervene. Do you have any methods to intervene that can be shared and used by our panel?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about intervening in. Are we intervening in adolescent nitwittery? Are we intervening in potentially dangerous activities? Are we intervening in, and so it depends, but the intervention, particularly on the mental health side, should be driven by those folks who understand that process. But I've seen intervening in that adolescent nitwittery, an SRO in a school with a unique population of kids who were disrupting football games. He created a program he called the Rowdies. He went to school, got some money, got t-shirts for all of them. They wear their t-shirts and he sits in the middle of them at the football game. I mean, so it depends on what you mean by intervene, because intervention runs a huge gamut of things. Blue in the School is an intervention. The teaching them, giving them a behavioral threat assessment process where they can report things. A anonymous and confidential tip reporting protocol is an intervention. It moves that information. So there are lots of ways to intervene. It depends on where you're intervening at and what's going on. We get wrapped up with the issue of active shooter. That's not, I'm not going to intervene in that. My father always said if anybody shot them, it would be in the rear end because they'd see that going away. That's kind of where I'm going to be on that one. So those folks who intervene in that level are different than what we're talking about. So it may be the teacher intervening by saying, Johnny, you're a little off today. Is everything okay? It may be the custodian who says, hey, come on over here. You're hanging out by yourself. Grab this broom. You and I are going to do this. So intervention runs a huge gamut.
Yeah, and what I will echo on that is having some type of program, ATAP Assist or other, where you can share that information allows for experts, Detective Heavrin, Ms. Dunholter, even the teachers to be able to intervene on the smaller levels. But it bringing in those resources is huge.
Effective movement of the information is the critical element. We talked about it early. Threat assessment as a process rarely fails. Referral to the threat assessment process fails fairly regularly.
I think too, with intervening, there's a difference between the expert that can intervene and has the skills to intervene versus the person who has rapport with the situation. Sometimes it's a partnership between those two, or sometimes it's one or the other. Sometimes it's a tag team. You know, it's all case by case.
That's big. I wish we had another hour to delve into where that could take us, but that's the that's the beauty of, or I should say, that's the downside of having a panel discussion with limited amount of time. Any final closing comments from our panelists here? So much great information. I know that.
A quick one from us. We are a state agency. Schoolsafety.idaho.gov. Everything on the website's available to you. If you steal it from us, it's been stolen twice. We get the best that we can find and put it on the website. Some of it we developed, some of it is just stuff that's come about. And I don't want to say best practice in this stuff because it's not a situation where we in a laboratory recreate these issues. It's effective practice. It's things we've seen that work. Feel free.
And I will applaud the work that's been done there. I'm a huge advocate of the Idaho Standard Response Commands. You can pull that one off their website. They've broken down emergency response commands in schools to 4. And I love what Guy says. They're at 4 because they couldn't figure out how to make it 3. And that, for an old dumb cop, is huge.
Well, thank you. And again, you know, the matter is we have to create the culture that fosters this. And that's the real critical element and that means collaboration across the board. It means encouraging people to make changes from their normal behavior. It means advocating for what we know to be correct. It means, it means creating that school community whose purpose is to cradle and care for kids.
Takes a village, or in this case, a school. Other comments? All right. Again, I thank each and every one of you. I greatly appreciate your time, the work that you do, and your efforts to work and better our communities. Thank you very much for joining us here at your ATAP Comprehensive panel discussion on addressing the challenges of school safety.
Tony, thanks, and be well, all of you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Stay safe.